Chloe stared at the document, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling slightly against the thick, cream-colored paper. The letterhead was aggressively simple, the name of a law firm she'd never heard of, but the words themselves were weapons. Notice of compulsory purchase and eviction. Her address, the one she had so proudly recited at countless charity luncheons and cocktail parties, was printed in stark black ink. 14 Bellevue Lane, the crown jewel of the most exclusive street in the city. She thought it was a mistake, a tasteless, elaborate prank. Her husband Marcus would have a fit. He would call their lawyers, powerful men with names like cornerstones, and this absurdity would be crushed, the sender reprimanded, perhaps even sued for the sheer audacity of it. But as she read on, a cold dread began to seep through the floorboards of her outrage. The document spoke of a municipal redevelopment initiative, a large-scale urban renewal project. It named the developer, Orion Group, and the lead architectural firm, Keystone Design Collective. And then it named the principal architect, Liam Vance. The name felt like a ghost at the feast, her ex-husband, the man she had discarded 2 years ago with the casual cruelty of someone tossing out last season's fashion. The man she had told, in the sterile quiet of a divorce attorney's office, that he would never recover, that he was destined for a life of quiet mediocrity, a small man with small dreams. He was an architect, yes, but in her world, he was a draftsman, a functionary. He lacked the killer instinct, the hunger for status that she and Marcus understood was the true currency of life. Within 2 years, she had told him, "You'll be a forgotten footnote in my much more interesting story." He had simply looked at her, his gaze clear and unnervingly calm, and said nothing. His silence had infuriated her more than any argument could have. It was the silence of a man who knew something she didn't. What she didn't know then, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, was that Liam's silence was not an absence of words, but a presence of purpose. While she and Marcus were building a life on a foundation of appearances, Liam was laying the groundwork for an empire, and the first stone was being laid right where her perfect house now stood. This single piece of paper was not just an eviction notice. It was the culmination of 2 years of quiet, relentless work. It was the final move in a chess game Chloe never even knew she was playing. It was the sound of her entire world, built on the fragile pillars of status and scorn, beginning to fracture. I hope this story is already grabbing you. We're about to go on a journey, and I promise you, the destination is worth the wait. If you're enjoying it so far, do me a favor and tap that like button. And if you're new here, consider subscribing, because you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's go back 2 years, to the day it all began. The air in the lawyer's office was the color of old money, mahogany, leather, and strained silence. Chloe sat perfectly upright, her posture a testament to years of ballet lessons and social conditioning. She was a sculpture of victory, clad in a crisp white suit that cost more than the sensible sedan Liam drove. Across the vast, polished table, Liam looked unremarkable. He wore a simple gray suit, well-made but not ostentatious. His hands were resting on the table, still and steady. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't slumped. He was simply present, a point of stillness in the storm of Chloe's making. "So, to be clear," Chloe said, her voice cutting through the quiet, "the division of assets is final. I retain the house, its contents, the art collection, and the portfolio of joint investments." She didn't phrase it as a question. It was a declaration. Her lawyer, a portly man named Gerald, cleared his throat. "Well, Ms. Albright, soon to be Thorne," he amended with a fawning smile toward Marcus, who was seated slightly behind Chloe like a preening bodyguard. "Mr. Vance is entitled to half the marital assets, legally speaking. And he has agreed to waive that right," Chloe stated, turning her gaze on Liam. It was a look designed to diminish, to shrink him in his chair. In exchange for, what was it again, Liam? Your professional effects? She made the words sound like children's toys. Your drawing table and your little books. Liam's eyes met hers. There was no anger in them, no hurt she could savor. There was only a deep, abiding calm that felt like a judgment. My designs, he corrected her softly, my concepts, and my personal library. That is correct. He had a worn leather portfolio at his feet, and his hand rested on it now, a subtle, almost unconscious gesture. Marcus scoffed, a short, barking sound of derision. You're walking away from millions for some sketches? Are you a fool? Marcus Thorne was a man built of sharp angles and expensive cologne. His success was in acquisitions, in hostile takeovers. He saw the world as a series of assets to be stripped, and he couldn't comprehend someone valuing an idea over a dividend. The ideas have value to me, Liam said, his voice even. Chloe leaned forward, the picture of magnanimity, a queen granting a pardon to a court jester. Liam, I want you to understand this isn't personal. It's about momentum. I'm moving forward, upward. Marcus and I have plans. The house on Bellevue Lane is central to that. It's a symbol. You understand symbols, don't you? You draw them. The insult was cloaked in condescension, a velvet glove on an iron fist. I understand them perfectly, Liam replied. Good, Chloe said, sitting back, satisfied. She felt the exhilarating rush of a clean cut, a decisive victory. She was shedding her old life, and him with it. She looked at him, at his plain suit and his quiet demeanor, and a final, sharp dart of pity and scorn arose in her. She wanted to pin him to the wall with it, to ensure he never forgot this moment, this power imbalance. You'll never recover from this, you know, she said, her voice dropping to a confidential, almost sympathetic whisper, which made it all the more cruel. And I don't even mean the money, I mean this. She gestured vaguely at the room, at herself, at Marcus. This level, you were never built for it. You'll go back to your little projects, designing kitchen extensions and garden sheds. You'll find a quiet life, and you'll be perfectly, mundanely content. But you will never, ever get back to this. For the first time, a flicker of something moved across Liam's face. It wasn't pain. It looked, impossibly, like amusement. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth before vanishing. Thank you for the prophecy, Chloe, he said. He then turned to his lawyer, a quiet, unassuming woman named Eleanor. Are we done here? Eleanor, who had been watching the exchange with a look of profound distaste for Chloe and Marcus, nodded sharply. The papers are signed. It's done. Liam stood up. He picked up his worn leather portfolio. He didn't look at Chloe again. He simply nodded to the lawyers and walked out of the room. He didn't slam the door. He didn't rush. His footsteps were measured, even, the sound of a man walking not away from something, but toward it. Chloe watched him go, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. She turned to Marcus and took his hand. Well, she said brightly, that's that. Now, about the caterers for the housewarming. The future was a glittering highway stretching out before her, and she had just removed the final piece of debris from her path. She couldn't have been more wrong. She hadn't cleared the road. She had just handed the map to the man who was about to build a new one, right over her. The weeks that followed the divorce were a study in contrasts, a perfect diptych of diverging fates. On one side, there was Chloe and Marcus ascending. They threw a lavish housewarming party at 14 Bellevue Lane, a party that made the society pages. The theme was New Beginnings. Champagne flowed from a crystalline fountain. A string quartet played softly in the manicured gardens. Chloe, radiant in a shimmering silver gown, moved through the crowd of the city's elite, accepting their congratulations. She had married up, and in her circle that was the highest possible achievement. Bellevue Lane itself was a character in their story. It wasn't just a street, it was a brand. Each house was a stately mansion, set back from the road on a sprawling lawn, protected by ancient oaks and wrought iron fences. The residents were old money families, tech billionaires, and titans of industry. To live on Bellevue Lane was to have arrived. It was a quiet, insulated paradise of wealth, a fortress against the untidiness of the real world. Chloe's house, now their house, was one of the grandest, a Georgian-style manor with white columns and a slate roof, a home that broadcasted stability and power. Marcus had already begun renovations, hiring a famous interior designer to gut the stale aesthetic Chloe had once shared with Liam and replace it with something more aggressively modern, more Marcus. Chloe felt a deep, profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged. Every morning she would wake up in her vast, sun-drenched bedroom, look out over the flawless green lawn, and feel a thrill of ownership. She had earned this. She had been ruthless, and her ruthlessness had been rewarded. Occasionally, a fleeting thought of Liam would cross her mind. She imagined him in some cramped, depressing apartment, surrounded by his dusty books and pointless drawings, probably eating takeout from a carton. The image brought a small, sharp sliver of satisfaction. It confirmed her decision. It justified her cruelty. He was the past, a drab, black and white photograph, while her life was now in vibrant, glorious color. On the other side of the diptych was Liam. He did in fact move into an apartment, but it wasn't the grim, lightless box Chloe imagined. It was a spacious, industrial-style loft in a revitalized part of the city, a neighborhood Chloe and her friends considered edgy and therefore to be avoided. The apartment was spare, almost monastic. It had high ceilings, huge windows that flooded the space with natural light, and polished concrete floors. He didn't furnish it with expensive things. He brought in his drafting table, his books, which lined an entire wall on simple steel shelves, and a few comfortable, well-designed pieces of furniture. It was a space for work, for thought. He sold the fancy car they had shared and bought a reliable, unassuming sedan. He wore simple, functional clothes, dark jeans, gray t-shirts, comfortable boots. To an outside observer, especially one from Chloe's world, he looked like a man who had been drastically downsized. He had taken a fall. But Liam didn't feel like he had fallen. He felt like he had been unburdened. The weight of Chloe's expectations, of maintaining a lifestyle he found hollow, was gone. He felt light. He felt free. Most nights he would stand at the vast window of his loft, looking out at the sprawling, glittering city. He wasn't looking at the established centers of power, the glittering towers where Marcus made his fortune. He was looking at the forgotten parts, the old industrial districts, the neglected waterfronts, the neighborhoods that had been left behind by progress. While Chloe was looking at her perfect, static world on Bellevue Lane, Liam was looking at the city as a living, breathing organism, full of potential for change, for rebirth. And every night, after a simple dinner, he would unlatch the worn leather portfolio. He would spread the contents out on his drafting table under the bright, clean light of an architect's lamp. Inside were not sketches for kitchen extensions. They were bold, visionary drawings, plans for sweeping bridges that looked like sails, for public parks that flowed like rivers through concrete canyons, for buildings that seemed to breathe with the city around them. This was his life's work, the things he had tried to explain to Chloe, who had only ever seen them as a hobby that distracted from the more important business of social climbing. One evening, about a month after the divorce, a man named David Chen came to the loft. David was an old friend from architecture school, a man with a mind for numbers and logistics that perfectly complemented Liam's creative vision. He looked around the spare apartment, then at the plans spread across the table. "So," David said, his eyes wide with admiration, "the Phoenix Project. You're really going to do it?" Liam tapped a large map of the city, his finger tracing a line through a dilapidated area that encompassed several blocks of low-rise warehouses and neglected commercial buildings. an area that just so happened to border the pristine, untouched enclave of Bellevue Lane. "We're going to do it," Liam corrected him. "Orion Group is on board. They've been looking for a legacy project, something transformative. They like my preliminary proposal." David let out a low whistle. "Orion Group? Liam, that's the biggest fish in the ocean. How did you even get in a room with them?" Liam smiled, a real smile this time, full of quiet confidence. "I've been cultivating a relationship with their CEO for over a year. He's a silent partner in a small firm I did some pro bono work for. He saw my potential long before, well, long before." He didn't need to say Chloe's name. "He knows I don't care about the flashy stuff. I care about the work. He trusts me." Liam then pointed to the worn leather portfolio. "Chloe thought she was taking everything. The house, the money. She let me walk away with this. She called it my little hobby. She had no idea she was handing me the keys to the future." The first public encounter happened 3 months after the divorce. It was a Saturday morning at a high-end organic market, the kind of place where vegetables were displayed like jewelry. Liam was there to buy coffee beans, dressed in his usual uniform of jeans and a simple black sweater. He was examining a bag of Ethiopian yirgacheffe when he heard a voice that was as familiar as it was unwelcome. "Well, look what we have here." He turned. Chloe and Marcus stood there, a vision of weekend wealth. Chloe wore white linen trousers and a navy blue cashmere top, a large, floppy hat perched on her head. Marcus was in salmon-colored shorts and a polo shirt with a tiny, embroidered horse. They both held designer shopping bags. They looked at Liam, then at his simple attire, and their expressions were a perfect blend of pity and condescension. "Liam," Chloe said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "how are you? We were just talking about you the other day." This was a lie, but it was a necessary social lubricant for the insult she was about to deliver. "I'm well, Chloe." "Marcus," Liam said, his tone neutral. He gave a slight nod, making no move to extend a hand. "Are you shopping for your apartment?" Chloe asked, drawing out the word as if it were an exotic, slightly unclean specimen. "Finding everything you need?" "Just coffee," Liam replied, holding up the bag. Marcus let his eyes travel down Liam's frame, a dismissive, appraising glance. "Still sticking with the minimalist look, I see," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. "Very economical." Liam ignored him, his focus remaining on Chloe. He could see the calculation in her eyes. She was performing for Marcus, reinforcing the narrative that she had upgraded, that Liam was a relic of a lesser past. She needed to see him diminished to feel secure in her own elevation. "I heard you've been taking on some small projects," Chloe continued, her voice light and airy. "A friend of a friend, I think it was Susan's cousin, said you designed a lovely little deck for them. It's so good that you're keeping busy." A lovely little deck. The words hung in the air, a deliberate, perfectly crafted put-down. She was framing him as a handyman, a neighborhood draftsman. The visionary architect she had once claimed to admire was gone, replaced by this caricature. Liam felt a familiar stillness settle over him. It was the same calm he'd felt in the lawyer's office. He didn't rise to the bait. He didn't defend himself. He knew the truth. The audience knew the truth. The dramatic irony was a shield. While they were mocking him for designing a deck, he had spent the previous night finalizing the structural integrity plans for a 40-story residential tower. "Work is steady," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm enjoying it." Chloe's smile tightened. His refusal to appear wounded was frustrating. She wanted a reaction. She wanted to see a flicker of the envy and regret she was so certain he must be feeling. "Well, we must run," she said, linking her arm through Marcus's. "We're hosting a brunch. A few of the neighbors from Bellevue Lane. You remember the Hendersons, don't you? They just bought the property next to us. For 8 figures. The market is just extraordinary." Every word was a small, polished stone thrown at him. We live on Bellevue Lane. We have wealthy neighbors. We are part of an exclusive world you no longer have access to. Have a good weekend, Liam said, and he turned back to the coffee beans, a clear, simple dismissal. As they walked away, he heard Marcus mutter to Chloe, loud enough for him to overhear. God, it's almost sad. He looks so beaten. Liam paid for his coffee. He walked out of the market into the bright morning sun. He did not feel beaten. He felt focused. He got into his unassuming sedan, the car Marcus would have scoffed at, and drove back to his loft. He brewed a pot of the expensive coffee, the aroma filling his workspace. Then he sat down at his drafting table, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and began to sketch. He drew the sweeping lines of a public plaza, a place where people from all walks of life could gather, a place that would one day stand where Chloe's exclusive, insular world was currently holding its self-congratulatory brunch. Each line he drew was a quiet, definitive answer to their scorn. He wasn't building a deck, he was building a new reality. While Liam was quietly laying the foundations of his new world, his secret life began to take concrete shape. The loft was his sanctuary and think tank, but the real work was happening elsewhere. 3 days a week, he would drive to a nondescript office building in a part of town that was neither fashionable nor forgotten. It was simply anonymous. On the directory in the lobby, the 5th floor was listed as KD Collective. No one would know that stood for Keystone Design Collective. The office itself was a stark contrast to Liam's loft. It was a bustling, high-tech hub of activity. Young, brilliant architects and engineers sat at banks of powerful computers, rendering complex 3D models. The walls were covered in blueprints, logistical charts, and satellite images of the target district. At the center of it all was a massive, exquisitely detailed scale model of the project. It covered a table the size of 3 ping-pong tables. The Meridian. It was breathtaking. It wasn't just a collection of buildings, it was a fully integrated urban ecosystem. Sleek, environmentally sustainable residential towers soared into the sky, their designs inspired by the natural forms of crystals. A winding, elevated park, the Sky River, snaked through the development, connecting buildings and providing green space where there was once only concrete. There was a state-of-the-art concert hall, its roof shaped like an unfurling petal, a bustling marketplace, and a new light rail station seamlessly integrated into the whole. David Chen, his partner, was the logistical mastermind who kept this complex engine running. While Liam was the soul of the project, David was its nervous system. He handled the budgets, the timelines, the permits, the labyrinthine city codes. One afternoon, Liam and David stood before the model, contemplating their creation. David pointed a laser at a section of low-rise buildings on the model's edge. Orion's acquisition team is making progress. They've secured another 3 properties this week, all under different shell corporations. No one is connecting the dots yet. What about the residential zone? Liam asked, his eyes fixed on a small, perfectly replicated cluster of mansions on the model. At the center was a tiny, white-columned house, 14 Bellevue Lane. David's expression became more serious. That's the final, most delicate phase. These people are entrenched. They won't sell willingly. The city council has already agreed in principle to the compulsory purchase order, citing the project's overwhelming public benefit. But the optics have to be perfect. The official announcement has to come before the individual notices go out. We need to frame this as an inevitable, positive transformation for the city, not as a hostile takeover of a beloved neighborhood. Liam ran a hand over the miniature replica of Chloe's house. He felt a strange detachment, as if he were looking at a historical artifact. The life he had lived there felt like it belonged to someone else. She has no idea, he said, more to himself than to David. She thinks she's at the center of the world. She doesn't realize she's living on the edge of a construction site. Her arrogance is our greatest asset, David said pragmatically. She and her husband, they're so convinced of their own importance, they're blind. They're looking up at the social ladder, not down at the ground beneath their feet. The secrecy was absolute. The team was small and vetted. Everyone had signed ironclad non-disclosure agreements. Liam himself avoided the architectural social scene entirely. He had become a ghost. In the world that he used to inhabit with Chloe, his name was now only ever mentioned in the past tense, a cautionary tale or a subject of pity. It was the perfect camouflage. He was investing everything he had, not just his money, but his time, his energy, his entire being into the Meridian. The settlement from the divorce, which Chloe had assumed he was living off meagerly, had been the seed money for the initial proposals and for securing David as a partner. It was the best investment he had ever made. He had traded a house for a city block. His life settled into a rhythm. Days at the KD Collective office, refining the dream. Evenings in his loft, sketching, thinking, living and breathing the project. Weekends were for quiet contemplation, walking the very streets he planned to transform, feeling their history, imagining their future. He was a monk dedicated to a singular, holy purpose. He knew that what he was doing would be perceived by Chloe as an act of revenge. And perhaps, in the very beginning, a small, wounded part of him had been fueled by that. But as the project grew, it had become something more. It was no longer about her. It was about creation. It was about building something meaningful, something that would outlast petty slights in social games. It was about proving, not to her, but to himself, that his worth was not tied to a house or a bank account, but to the power of his vision. One evening, looking at the city from his window, he thought of her words in the lawyer's office. "You'll never recover from this." She had meant it as a curse, but it had become a liberation. By taking away the life he thought he was supposed to want, she had given him the freedom to build a life he was truly meant to have. The fire she thought would consume him had instead forged him. And soon, very soon, she would see the scale of the furnace she had so carelessly ignited. A year after the divorce, the universe, with its penchant for dramatic irony, arranged a second encounter. It was at Aria, one of the city's most celebrated restaurants, a place where reservations were a status symbol in themselves. Liam was there for a quiet dinner to celebrate a milestone, the final approval of the project's environmental impact report. He was alone, seated at a small table near the back, enjoying a glass of wine and the low hum of sophisticated conversation. He had chosen the restaurant precisely because he knew Chloe and Marcus considered it their territory. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was simply existing, indifferent to their world, but no longer afraid of crossing its path. He was halfway through his main course when he saw them enter. They were with a group of 6 other people, all laughing loudly, exuding an aura of collective importance. Chloe, dressed in a striking red dress, scanned the room, not to find a table, but to be seen. Her eyes swept past Liam, then snapped back, widening in disbelief. She stopped, and a ripple of silence spread through her group as they followed her gaze. She leaned over and whispered something to Marcus. He looked over at Liam, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. Instead of going to their table, the entire group, led by Chloe and Marcus, detoured toward Liam's. It was a power move, a public display. They formed a semicircle around his small table, literally and figuratively cornering him. "Liam," Chloe said, her voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "What a surprise! Dining alone?" The question was laced with pity. "Good evening, Chloe," Liam said calmly, placing his fork and knife neatly on his plate. He looked up at her, then at the faces of her friends, some of whom he recognized. They wore expressions of smug curiosity. "We were just on our way to the private dining room," Marcus announced, gesturing expansively. "Celebrating a new acquisition, a big one." He looked at Liam expectantly, as if waiting for him to be impressed. Liam simply nodded. Congratulations. His calm was like a vacuum, and Chloe felt an urgent need to fill it with noise, with evidence of her superior life. You know, she said, tilting her head, I was thinking the other day, it's been a whole year. Can you believe it? And so much has changed. Marcus's portfolio has doubled. We're spending August in the south of France. And you're still here. The implication was clear. You are static. You are left behind. One of Marcus's friends, a beefy man with a loud laugh, chimed in. Chloe told us you're an architect, Vance. Still plugging away? I heard the building trade is tough for the little guys right now. Liam met the man's gaze. I manage. I'm sure you do, Chloe said, patting his shoulder in a gesture of mock comfort that made him flinch internally. But you must get lonely, all that quiet. We have so much going on, I barely have time to think. This was the core of her worldview. A life wasn't being lived unless it was full of noise, events, and acquisitions. A quiet life, a thoughtful life, was a failed life. The humiliation was more potent this time. It was public. It was a performance for an audience. He was being used as a prop in her play, the before picture to her glorious after. He looked at her, at the bright, hard gleam in her eyes, and he saw past the designer dress and the expensive jewelry. He saw a profound insecurity. She needed to mock him to reassure herself. She needed to see him as small so she could feel big. He decided to give her a thread, a small, ambiguous statement she could weave into her narrative of his failure. You're right, Chloe, he said, his voice soft. It is a quiet life. It gives me a lot of time to focus on a single project, something I've been working on for a long time. Chloe's eyes lit up. She had her hook. Oh, a passion project. How lovely. Don't tell me, a dream home for some lucky client? Something like that, Liam said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. He was thinking of the thousands of people who would one day live in the Meridian. It's about building a community. Marcus laughed dismissively. Very noble. Listen, we'd love to stay and chat about your little community project, but the champagne is waiting. He clapped Liam on the back, a gesture of dominance disguised as camaraderie. Take care of yourself, Vance. Try not to work too hard. The group moved on, their laughter echoing in their wake. Liam sat for a moment in the sudden silence. He could feel the eyes of the other diners on him. They had witnessed the scene, a public dressing down. He felt a flush of heat rise in his cheeks, the first crack in his stoic facade. It wasn't the insults themselves that stung, but the public nature of them, the casual cruelty of using him for sport. He took a slow, deep breath. He picked up his wine glass. He looked across the restaurant to the private room where Chloe's party had disappeared. He could hear their muffled, triumphant laughter. He thought of the scale model in the office. He thought of the teams of engineers, lawyers, and financiers working in secret. He thought of the immense, unstoppable machinery he had set in motion. Their laughter wasn't a sound of victory. It was the sound of a bell tolling, a sound they were simply unable to hear. He took a sip of his wine. The frustration cooled, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He was no longer just building a city. He was executing a judgment. He paid his bill, left a generous tip, and walked out of the restaurant. He didn't look back. The 2-year mark approached like a storm front on the horizon. The Meridian project was entering its final pre-announcement phase. The land acquisitions were 98% complete. The legal framework for the Bellevue Lane compulsory purchases was locked in. The city government was poised. The marketing and PR teams had a massive, coordinated launch plan ready to deploy. It was a coiled spring of immense power, waiting for Liam's signal to be released. For Liam, these were the days of the quiet before the storm. A strange sense of calm had descended upon him. The work was done. The outcome was inevitable. All that remained was to watch it unfold. The final humiliation, the one that would sever the last thread of any possible sympathy he might have had for Chloe, came at the annual Civic Progress Charity Gala. It was the premier social event of the year, a gathering of the city's wealthiest and most powerful citizens, all pretending to be philanthropists for a night. Liam hadn't planned to go. He despised these events. But David had insisted. "You have to be there," David had argued in their office a week prior. "It's the perfect symbolic location for the final scene of Act Two. You need to be seen one last time as the man they think you are. It will make the reveal that much more powerful. Think of it as gathering anecdotal data on peak arrogance." And so, Liam went. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored black tuxedo. He didn't look diminished. He looked elegant, understated. He was a classicist in a room full of fleeting trends. He kept to the edges of the grand ballroom, observing, a ghost at the feast. He saw Chloe and Marcus holding court near the massive ice sculpture at the center of the room. Chloe was in a gown of glittering gold, a queen in her element. She was laughing, her head thrown back, radiating a confidence that was absolute. For 2 years, her world had only confirmed her own brilliance. Every investment paid off. Every social gambit succeeded. She was untouchable. Liam was trying to slip out unnoticed when he heard his name called. "Liam, over here!" It was Marcus, waving him over with an imperious gesture. Liam sighed internally. He had no choice but to walk over. The closer he got, the more he felt like a lamb being led to a sacrificial altar. Chloe, Marcus, and their inner circle turned to face him, their expressions a mixture of amusement and predatory glee. "We were just wondering if you'd show up," Marcus said, his speech slightly slurred from champagne. He draped a heavy arm over Chloe's shoulders. "Look at us, Chloe, all of us here, celebrating progress. And here's your ex, still trying to get his foot in the door." Chloe smiled, a slow, venomous smile. She looked Liam up and down. "You clean up nicely, Liam. I'll give you that. But a nice suit doesn't change what's underneath, does it?" She leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper that was intentionally loud enough for everyone in their circle to hear. "Still living in that sad little box of an apartment? I heard from someone you're designing extensions for dog houses now. Is that true? How quaint." The circle of friends laughed. It was a practiced, sycophantic laugh. Liam's face was a mask of calm. He had been preparing for this moment. He knew it was coming. "That's just a rumor, Chloe," he said evenly. But Marcus was on a roll, emboldened by the alcohol and the fawning audience. "Come on, Vance, don't be shy. What's the biggest project you've got going on? A 2-car garage? A new patio? We're all dying to know what a man of your talents is up to these days." Liam felt a profound sense of detachment. He was watching a play, and these people were merely actors reading their lines. He looked at Chloe, at the woman he had once loved, and felt nothing but a vast, cold distance. The person he had loved was gone, or perhaps had never existed at all. This creature of pure, unadulterated status anxiety was all that was left. She delivered the final, killing blow. She took a step closer, her eyes boring into his. "You know, Marcus," she said, not looking at her husband but directly at Liam, "I think I did him a favor. I really do." Her voice was soft now, full of a terrible, false sincerity. "You were never meant for this world, Liam. You don't have the spine for it, the ambition. Some people are just small, and it's better for them to stay in their small worlds. You're happier there, aren't you?" Small. The word echoed in the space between them. It was the ultimate dismissal, the final judgment from her court. Liam didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. Instead, a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It was not a smile of amusement. It was a smile of pity. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of unease at his reaction. His calm was no longer just frustrating, it was unnerving. It felt superior. "Thank you for your perspective, Chloe," he said, his voice soft and clear. "It's been very illuminating." And with that, he gave a slight formal nod to the group, turned, and walked away. He didn't hurry. His steps were measured and confident. He walked out of the ballroom, out of the gala, out of the world that had just declared him irrelevant. As the glass doors closed behind him, he pulled out his phone. He sent a single text message to David. Now. The world changed on a Tuesday morning. It didn't start with a whisper. It started with a thunderclap that echoed across the entire city. At precisely 9 a.m., a coordinated press release from the mayor's office, Orion Group, and Keystone Design Collective hit every news outlet simultaneously. The headline on the city's main news website was stark and bold. Visionary architect Liam Vance unveils the Meridian, city's largest redevelopment in 50 years. Chloe was in her sun-drenched breakfast nook, scrolling through social media on her tablet, a cup of herbal tea steaming at her elbow. Marcus had already left for the day. An alert from a news app popped up. She usually ignored them, but the headline contained a name she hadn't expected to see. Liam Vance. Her first thought was that it was a mistake, a different Liam Vance. Or perhaps he had won some minor, insignificant award that the media, in a slow news day, had decided to inflate. She tapped the link, a smirk of condescending curiosity on her face. The smirk dissolved into a slack-jawed stare. The article was accompanied by a breathtaking video rendering, sweeping, cinematic shots of futuristic towers, lush green sky parks, and vibrant public spaces. It was beautiful. It was audacious. It was brilliant. The article described the project in glowing terms. A multi-billion-dollar initiative that would revitalize an entire district, create thousands of jobs, and become a new cultural and residential heart for the city. It named the financial backer, Orion Group, a corporate behemoth. And it named the creative genius behind it all, the lead architect and founder of the mysterious Keystone Design Collective, Liam Vance. There was a picture of him. It was a recent one, professionally taken. He stood in a modern, light-filled office, a confident, serene expression on his face. He was not the beaten, diminished man she had mocked at the gala just days before. He looked powerful. He looked important. He looked like the man who had just remade the city. Chloe's heart began to hammer against her ribs. Her mind raced, trying to process the impossible. This couldn't be real. The man who designed doghouses and decks? The small man? How? Then she scrolled down to the section detailing the project's location. A map was displayed, with the redevelopment zone highlighted in red. She saw the familiar grid of the old industrial area. And then her blood ran cold. The red zone didn't stop at the edge of the industrial district. It bled over, swallowing a small, exclusive residential street. Her street, Bellevue Lane. The article explained it with cold, bureaucratic precision. To achieve the project's full scope and integrate the new district with the city's existing infrastructure, the adjacent Bellevue Lane residential enclave will be acquired through a combination of private offers and, where necessary, municipal compulsory purchase orders, as approved by City Council Resolution 74B. The teacup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the Italian tile floor. She barely noticed. Her hands were shaking too hard to hold the tablet. She read the sentence again and again. Acquired. Compulsory purchase. Her house. Her perfect house, the symbol of her entire life, was not a castle. It was an obstacle in the path of Liam's ambition. Her phone rang, shrill and frantic. It was Marcus. "Did you see it?" he yelled, his voice tight with panic. "Did you see the news?" "Marcus, what is happening?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's Vance. It's your goddamn ex-husband. He's tearing down our house. He's tearing down the whole street." Marcus was a man who prided himself on his unflappable composure in the boardroom. That composure was gone, replaced by raw, naked fear. His wealth, his status, was deeply tied to the prestige and value of his address. This wasn't just an attack on their home, it was an attack on his net worth. As if on cue, the doorbell chimed. It was a crisp, formal sound. Chloe walked numbly to the door, her feet crunching on the broken shards of the teacup. Standing on her doorstep was a courier, holding a single, thick, cream-colored envelope. She took it, her fingers feeling strangely distant and clumsy. She tore it open. The letterhead was from a law firm she'd never heard of, and the words were the ones that would haunt her dreams. Notice of compulsory purchase and eviction. She sank to the floor, the document fluttering from her hand. The gala, his smile, that quiet, pitying smile. It hadn't been defeat. It hadn't been weakness. It had been the profound, absolute, terrifying confidence of a man who knew he had already won. Her words echoed back to her, a ghostly chorus of her own arrogance. You'll never recover from this. Some people are just small. She had been talking about him, but she had been prophesying her own doom. The next 48 hours were a blur of frantic phone calls, panicked meetings with lawyers, and the sickening, grinding realization of their own powerlessness. Every avenue they pursued led to a dead end. Their lawyers, the men with cornerstone names, came back with grim faces. The deal was airtight. The city was behind it. The Orion Group's legal team was a fortress. The compulsory purchase was legal, binding, and unstoppable. They would be paid fair market value, a term that felt like a slap in the face. How could you put a market value on Bellevue Lane? Its value was in its exclusivity, an exclusivity that was about to be wiped off the map. Marcus was a caged animal. He paced their living room, a space that now felt like a beautifully appointed death row cell, his face pale with fury and fear. "This isn't business, this is a vendetta," he snarled. "He did this to get back at you, at us." Chloe was numb. The social fallout had been immediate and brutal. Her phone, usually buzzing with invitations and gossip, was silent. Her friends, the ones who had laughed at Liam at the gala, were now facing the same fate. They weren't calling to commiserate, they were calling to blame. "Your ex-husband, Chloe," the wife of their 8-figure neighbor had shrieked at her over the phone. "You brought this curse upon us." She had been dethroned. In a single morning, she had gone from the queen of Bellevue Lane to its pariah. After 2 days of futility, Marcus turned to her, his eyes wild. "You have to call him." "What?" Chloe whispered. "Call him," Marcus insisted, grabbing her arms. "You were married to him. You have a history. Appeal to him. Beg if you have to. There has to be a way, an exception, a deal, something." The thought of calling Liam, of having to humble herself before the man she had so thoroughly scorned, was physically nauseating. But the alternative, losing everything she had built her identity around, was worse. With trembling hands, she found his number. She had kept it, perhaps as a private reminder of what she had left behind. She called. It rang once, then went to voicemail. She tried again an hour later. Same result. She sent a text. "Liam, please, we need to talk." For a full day, there was only silence. A profound, deafening silence from his end that mirrored the social silence on hers. Then, on the third day, a reply came. It wasn't from him. It was an email from an address she didn't recognize. "Mr. Vance will see you. His office. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Please be prompt." It was signed by an executive assistant. He wasn't even contacting her himself. He was delegating her. The humiliation was exquisite. The next morning, they drove to the address provided. It was a new, gleaming skyscraper in the heart of the financial district. A building so new it still smelled of fresh paint and ambition. The Keystone Design Collective occupied the top 3 floors. The lobby was a cathedral of glass and steel, with a living wall of green plants that stretched 60 feet high. When they announced themselves, the receptionist, a young woman with a calm, professional demeanor, simply nodded. "Mr. Vance is expecting you. Please take the private elevator." The elevator ride was silent and swift. It opened directly into a vast, sun-filled space. It wasn't an office, it was a panorama. 3 of the 4 walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a godlike view of the entire city. To the south, the glittering towers of the financial district. To the east, the sprawling residential suburbs. And to the north, laid out before them like a map on a general's table, was the old industrial district and Bellevue Lane. Liam was not sitting behind a desk. He was standing by the window, his back to them, looking out at the city. He wore a simple, dark gray sweater and trousers, his old uniform, but in this context it looked not like a sign of diminishment, but of a man so confident he had no need for the armor of a suit. He turned slowly. His face was calm, his eyes unreadable. "Chloe, Marcus, thank you for coming." The sheer scale of the room, the view, the quiet authority in his voice, it all conspired to shrink them. Chloe and Marcus, who were used to commanding every room they entered, felt like supplicants. "Liam, what is this?" Chloe began, her voice barely a whisper. "This," Liam said with a sweep of his arm that encompassed the view, "is my office. And that," he pointed down toward Bellevue Lane, "is the future." Marcus found his voice, a mixture of bluster and desperation. "This is insane, Vance. You can't just bulldoze people's homes. This is a personal attack." Liam's gaze shifted to Marcus. It was cold. "Was it a personal attack, Marcus, when you and Chloe cornered me in a restaurant to mock my career? Was it a personal attack at the gala when you and your friends laughed at the idea of me designing a doghouse? No. You told me yourself. That was just business. This," Liam said, his voice dropping, "is just business." He used their own logic, their own philosophy, and turned it into a weapon against them. He then walked over to a large, minimalist desk made of reclaimed wood and brushed steel. On it, there was only one object, his old, worn leather portfolio. He unlatched it and pulled out a stack of papers. They were sketches, drawn in pencil on simple drafting paper. They were rough, conceptual, but the vision was unmistakable. It was the meridian. "I started these while we were still married, Chloe," he said softly, his eyes finding hers. "I tried to show them to you. I told you I had a dream to reshape the waterfront, to build something that would last. Do you remember what you said?" Chloe stared at the drawings, her mind a blank wall of horror. "You said it was a cute little hobby," Liam continued, his voice devoid of malice. "A simple recitation of fact. You said I should focus on something that would actually make money, like learning to play the stock market like Marcus. You told me to stop dreaming and join the real world." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "So I did. I joined the real world. I just decided to build my own." Chloe finally broke. Tears streamed down her face. "Liam, please," she sobbed. "Don't do this. Not the house. It was our home." Liam looked at her, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his face. It was pity. "No, Chloe," he said gently. "It was my house. You made that very clear. It was an asset you acquired in a transaction. And now it's an asset I am acquiring in a transaction. A fair market value transaction. The same cold, clean logic you and Marcus admire so much." He then walked back to the window and looked down at her street. "You told me I would never recover. You told me I was small. You were so obsessed with looking up at the people above you that you never thought to look around, to see what the small people were building while you weren't paying attention." He turned back to them, his expression final. "The notices are legal. The project is moving forward. There are no exceptions. There are no deals." He looked at Chloe, at the wreck of the woman who had once been his wife. "You wanted a life of momentum. You wanted to be part of something big. Congratulations, Chloe. You are now part of the largest urban renewal project in 50 years. You're just on the wrong side of the bulldozer. The aftermath was a slow, brutal demolition, not just of buildings, but of a marriage and a social standing. In the pristine silence of Liam's office, after he had delivered his final, quiet judgment, Chloe's world imploded. Marcus, his face a mask of disbelief, turned on her. The fear that had been simmering beneath his arrogant exterior finally boiled over into vicious, unrestrained rage. "This is your fault," he hissed, his voice low and venomous, completely ignoring Liam, who stood watching them with a dispassionate calm. "Your stupid, petty games. You had to poke him, didn't you? You couldn't just leave it alone." "My fault?" Chloe choked out, her tears turning from pleading to indignation. "You were right there with me. You laughed louder than anyone." "I was playing along with my wife," Marcus shot back, his voice rising. "I didn't know he was some kind of secret Moriarty plotting to destroy us. You were married to him for 10 years. How could you not know he was capable of this? How could you be so blind?" The accusation hung in the air, devastatingly accurate. She had been blind. Her entire worldview was a form of blindness, a willful ignorance of anything that didn't reflect her own perceived importance. She had looked at Liam and seen only what she wanted to see: a failure, a stepping stone, a confirmation of her own superiority. She had never seen the man. "You underestimated him," Marcus spat, the words like acid. "You, with your perfect judgment about everyone's status and potential, you completely, utterly missed the mark. You thought he was a field mouse and he was a python. And you invited him into our home, our lives, just to mock him." Their perfect, powerful union, built on a shared sense of superiority, shattered. In the face of a true, greater power, they turned on each other, their alliance revealed to be nothing more than a fair-weather friendship. The foundation of their marriage wasn't love or respect, it was a mutual admiration for their own reflection in the other's eyes. Now that the reflection was cracked, there was nothing left but blame. Liam watched this ugly spectacle for a moment longer. He saw no triumph in it, only a profound sadness. This was the world Chloe had chosen, a world where loyalty was conditional and alliances were transactional. He had built buildings and bridges. They had built this hollow cage of resentment. He turned to his desk and pressed a discreet button on his intercom. "Sarah, could you please show Mr. Thorne and Miss Albright out?" he said, his voice calm and professional. He did not call her Mrs. Thorne, a small, final act of erasure. A moment later, his assistant entered. She was polite but firm. "This way, please." Marcus, red-faced and sputtering, shot one last hateful glare at Liam. Chloe couldn't even look at him. She was a ghost of herself, wrapped in a shroud of shame and disbelief. She allowed herself to be led out of the office, out of the building, and back down to a world that no longer recognized her authority. The weeks that followed were a cascade of consequences. The story of the architect's revenge, as the tabloids gleefully called it, was everywhere. But the more respectable outlets framed it as a story of vision and urban renewal. Liam, who had been a ghost for 2 years, was now the city's most celebrated figure. He was interviewed by magazines, his face on covers. He handled the fame with the same quiet dignity he had handled the humiliation. He always steered the conversation away from the personal drama and back to the project, to his vision for a more integrated, humane city. For Chloe and Marcus, the fall was as swift as it was public. Their friends on Bellevue Lane, facing their own financial and social displacement, treated them as lepers. The value of Marcus's business, heavily leveraged against the inflated value of his real estate and his social connections, plummeted. The banks called in his loans. The big acquisition he had been celebrating at the restaurant fell through. His empire, like his house, was built on an unstable foundation. Within 3 months, Marcus had filed for divorce from Chloe, citing irreconcilable differences. In the legal documents, he claimed her personal vendetta against her ex-husband had led to his financial ruin. He stripped her of everything he could, using the same ruthless tactics he had once used in his business dealings. Chloe, who had prided herself on her shrewdness, found herself outmaneuvered and abandoned. She was forced to sell the jewelry, the art, the designer clothes, the very armor she had worn for years. She ended up in a small, tidy condominium in a respectable but unremarkable suburb, a place she would have once driven through with the windows rolled up and a look of disdain. Her new life was a mirror image of the one she had so scornfully imagined for Liam. It was quiet, it was small, it was mundane. She had lost the house, she had lost the husband, but most devastatingly, she had lost her status. She was no longer Mrs. Thorne of Bellevue Lane. She was just Chloe Albright, a divorced woman living in a condo, a footnote in the story of her much more interesting ex-husband. The prophecy she had made for him had, in a final, crushing irony, become her own. 6 months after the confrontation in his office, Liam stood on a temporary viewing platform, a cold autumn wind whipping at his coat. Below him, the demolition of Bellevue Lane was nearly complete. The grand houses, the symbols of entrenched power and exclusivity, were being reduced to rubble and dust. It was a noisy, violent, and strangely beautiful process. It was the necessary destruction that precedes creation. David Chen came to stand beside him, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. He handed one to Liam. "A penny for your thoughts," David said, his eyes on the mechanical claws tearing into what was once the Hendersons' mansion. Liam took a sip of the hot coffee, the warmth spreading through his hands. "I was thinking about foundations," he said. "We build these houses with deep foundations, thinking they'll last forever, but we forget that the ground itself can shift." "Poetic," David grinned, "and profitable. The first phase of residential sales for Meridian Tower 1 sold out in 6 hours. We're going to have to run a lottery for phase 2. Liam nodded, but his eyes were distant. He wasn't thinking about the money. He was watching a crane lift a shattered white column from the wreckage of what had been 14 Bellevue Lane. His old house, Chloe's castle, now just debris to be hauled away. He felt no pleasure, no surge of vengeful satisfaction. He only felt a quiet, somber sense of finality. The past was finally being cleared. "Have you heard from her?" David asked gently. Liam shook his head. "No, and I don't expect to." He had done what was necessary. He had excised the rot, not just from the city's landscape, but from his own life. The rest was up to her. Redemption, if it were to come, had to be her own project. As if summoned by the thought, he saw a car pull up at the edge of the construction site's perimeter fence, far below them. It was a modest, domestic sedan, the kind he used to drive. A woman got out. Even from this distance, he recognized her. It was Chloe. She wasn't wearing designer clothes. She was in jeans and a simple jacket, her hair pulled back. She looked ordinary. She just stood there, her arms wrapped around herself, and stared at the ruin of her former life. She wasn't crying. She wasn't raging. She was just watching, a solitary, still figure against the backdrop of destruction and progress. David followed his gaze. "Want me to have security ask her to leave?" "No," Liam said softly. "Let her stay. She has a right to be here." They watched for a few minutes in silence. Then, Chloe turned, got back in her car, and drove away. She didn't look up at the viewing platform. She probably didn't even know he was there. Liam turned his back on the demolition and looked north, toward the city skyline where the first steel skeletons of the Meridian's towers were beginning to rise. That was the future. That was where his focus belonged. He had learned the most valuable lesson of all. True worth isn't about the house you live in, the clothes you wear, or the people whose approval you crave. It isn't about status. It's about substance. It's not about the life you acquire, but the one you build. Chloe had tried to put him in a small box, but she had only succeeded in trapping herself in one. He had been liberated by her scorn, freed to build a world so much larger than the one she had ever imagined. He had not only recovered, he had been reborn. The story of Liam and Chloe is a powerful reminder that the tallest walls we build are often the ones within our own minds. It teaches us that integrity is a stronger foundation than arrogance, and patience is a more powerful tool than aggression. True strength isn't loud. It's the quiet, relentless work you do when no one is watching. What do you think? Was Liam's action an act of justified justice or cold revenge? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know what the biggest lesson you took from this story is. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found value in this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that explores the depths of human nature. Until next time, remember to build your life on a foundation that can't be shaken.